Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany. Welcome to Randomness, where we talk about a little bit of everything, the deep, the weird, and the real. So take a breath, open your mind, and let's get into it. All right, y'all. Today we are going to be talking about something that's kind of hard to put into words, but I think everyone has experienced those moments when reality feels not quite real. And I'm not talking about like psychosis or dissociation or anything clinical. I'm talking about those everyday moments when the world feels strangely thin, when the ordinariness, whatever we've all agreed upon, it starts to wobble a little. Maybe it's a word that suddenly looks wrong, even though you've spelled it correctly, or a dream that feels more real than your actual day, or a coincidence so perfectly timed it kind of feels scripted. You know, these moments make you wonder, is reality as solid as we pretend it is, or are we really just good at not looking too closely? I was reading something the other day, and I found some very interesting reality questioning moments, and I want to explore them with you today. And not because I'm trying to convince you we live in a simulation, though who knows, but because I think these experiences reveal something important about perception, presence, and how much of reality is actually just consensus and habit. So let's get into these glitches in the matrix, these moments when the world feels less fixed, less direct, and less innocent than it appears. Okay, so the first one is when a stranger sees you more clearly than people who know you. This one's kind of like eerie, how often it happens. You meet someone new. The conversation is brief, maybe accidental. You've just met, so there's no history, no context, no accumulated knowledge of who you are. And yet somehow this person notices something about you that the people in your daily life have completely missed. They say something that lands so precisely, so accurately, that you're left thinking, how did they see that? How did a stranger perceive what my friends and family don't? Like, how can someone who has just entered your life notice the thing that people around you have stopped seeing? And I think the answer is both simple and kind of unsettling. Strangers encounter us before habit does, before familiarity flattens perception, before everyone starts relating not to who we are, but to who we have been most consistently. The people who know you, they have a version of you in their minds. They're responding to that version, the one built from patterns and history and expectation. They're not actually seeing you in the present moment. They are seeing their accumulated impression of you. And a stranger doesn't have that. They're encountering you fresh without the filter of what you've always been or what they expect you to be. And when that happens, when someone you've just met says the exact thing you needed to hear or sees the exact thing you've been hiding, it can feel almost scripted, as if someone entered the scene for no other reason than to say one thing that had been waiting to be heard. That's kind of what makes it feel like a glitch. It's too perfectly timed, too precisely what was needed, as if reality staged the encounter. And maybe it did. Maybe it's just coincidence. But the feeling it leaves, that sense of how did they know, is undeniably strange. Okay, so how about when you are living your life but not fully inside it. And this might be the strangest human experience, functioning well while feeling vaguely absent. You get up, you answer messages, you complete tasks, you show up for work, for obligations, for social events. Outwardly, everything looks intact. You're doing all the responsible adult things, but inwardly, something is not fully arriving. You're going through the motions. You are executing life rather than inhabiting it. You are competent but not present, functional but still not really fully there. There's something kind of creepy about that split, and not because it's dramatic. Usually it's not. That's part of what makes it so easy to miss. You're not falling apart. You're not in crisis. You're simply moving through your life with less presence than you would like to admit. And if you do that long enough, reality starts to feel suspicious. Not fake exactly, just kind of like you're running a program, as if routine, repetition, and competence have quietly replaced immediacy. Sometimes the problem is not reality. Sometimes the problem is that we have become too efficient to feel it. This is the real glitch, I think. Not that the world is unreal, but that we've become so skilled at autopilot that we've forgotten what full presence even feels like. We mistake functioning for living, performance for experience, going through the day for actually being in it. And when you realize you've been doing this maybe for weeks, maybe for years, the whole world takes on this strange, thin quality, like you're watching your life happen rather than living it. And that's when people start questioning reality, not because something external changed, but because they've been absent from their own experience for so long that when they finally notice, everything feels off. I feel like I can really relate to that one. And this one all the time. When a familiar word suddenly looks wrong or sounds wrong. Okay, so yeah, this one's specific, but so universally relatable. You know, you are typing or writing a completely normal word, a word you've used thousands of times, and suddenly it looks wrong. You stare at it. You know it's spelled correctly, but something about the shape of it, the arrangement of letters, it feels off, foreign, like it's not a real word at all. Or you say a word too many times in a row and it stops sounding like language. It becomes just sound, detached from meaning. The word is still the word. The letters stay where they are, and yet your relationship to it shifts, and the whole thing starts to wobble. And this is actually called semantic satiation, when repetition temporarily breaks the connection between a word and its meaning. But the feeling it creates is deeply unsettling in a way that seems disproportionate to what's actually happening, because nothing actually changed. The word didn't change, reality didn't change, but your perception shifted just enough to make you aware of how fragile meaning actually is. Meaning is not as fixed as we pretend. It's held together, in part by rhythm, trust, repetition, and not looking too long. And if that's true of language, what else is it true of? How much of reality depends on us not looking too closely, on maintaining the rhythm of recognition, on trusting that things mean what we've agreed they mean? Sometimes I think the world feels stable largely because we agree not to stare at it for too long. Reality holds together through consensus and habit. And when either of those wobbles, even briefly, the whole structure, it feels less solid. In a word, looking wrong is a tiny example, but it reveals something larger about how perception works and how easily it can come undone. Okay, so moving on. When a dream leaves more residue than the day before it. Some dreams dissolve the moment you wake up, others stay, not just as images or story, but as a mood, as atmosphere. You carry them into your day. A conversation that never happened affects you for hours. A person who doesn't exist leaves behind a real longing, a place you've never been. It feels emotionally familiar in a way your actual life doesn't. It's kind of difficult to explain, because the body doesn't always care whether something happened in waking life or not. It responds to intensity, to fear, tenderness, loss, emotional charge. And a dream can leave behind exactly the same ache as a real encounter, sometimes more. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If something imagined can alter your nervous system so completely, then what exactly are we calling real? The event itself? The effect it leaves? The fact that the body believed it? I've had dreams that felt more emotionally significant than entire weeks of my waking life. Dreams where I grieved someone I've never met. Dreams where I experienced a kind of love or connection that I haven't found in reality. And the weird thing is, that grief is real, that longing is real, even though the person isn't, even though the experience only happened in my sleeping brain. So what does real even mean if our bodies can't tell the difference? Some dreams feel less like fiction and more like another room inside the same house. And maybe dreams aren't less real than waking life. Maybe they're just a different kind of real, a different room in the same structure of consciousness. And if that's true, then reality is stranger and more porous than we usually acknowledge. And what about when coincidence arrives with too much precision? Okay, I know the rational explanations, confirmation bias, pattern recognition. We remember the hits and forget the misses. I know all that. And yet, there are coincidences that arrive with such specific timing that rational explanations begin to feel a little too neat and tidy. You think about someone you haven't thought about in years, and they text you that day. Or a subject keeps returning from different directions until it becomes impossible not to notice. You meet a person strangely connected to another part of your life, as if the world keeps folding back on itself. Of course, the mind notices patterns. Of course, we remember the hits more than the misses. But knowledge does not always reduce that feeling. Some coincidences don't feel magical, they feel structural, as if reality has briefly shown it seems. And I'm not saying everything is a sign or that the universe is sending messages. Most coincidences are probably maybe just math. With enough people and enough interactions, unlikely things become statistically inevitable. But the feeling these moments create, the sense that something is being revealed, that there's a pattern you're not quite grasping, that feeling is real and it's worth paying attention to. Maybe coincidences are glitches. Maybe they're just how probability works. Or maybe there are moments when we are paying closer attention than usual and reality feels less random because we're actually noticing what's always been there. Either way, they make the world feel less solid, less straightforward, more interconnected than our everyday consciousness usually perceives. All right, so when your body reacts before your mind catches up, and this one fascinates me because it happens all the time and we mostly ignore it. You tense before you can explain why. You trust someone immediately. You feel wrong in a place before you have a respectable reason. You sense danger, dishonesty, safety, all before your conscious mind has assembled any evidence. The body knows before thought does. And this is so common that we have expressions for it. Gut feeling, intuition, vibes. Something feels off. But when you really pay attention to how often this happens, your confidence in conscious reality shifts. Because if so much of what guides us begins below language, below declared thought, below what we can neatly justify, then we are not the only thing happening inside ourselves. The mind likes to pretend it's in charge. It likes narrative and evidence and being the one who makes the decisions, but the body perceives first and explains never, is taking in information constantly through micro expressions, tone of voice, energy, things we don't consciously register, and forming conclusions before the thinking brain has even started processing. And that body knowledge is often more accurate than the rational mind. You meet someone and immediately feel uneasy. Your thinking brain says, be polite, give them a chance. You're being judgmental, but your body is screaming danger. 6 months later, you realize your body was right. And that to me is a much stranger fact than most philosophical theories. It means reality is entering us through channels we don't fully control. We're receiving information constantly that never becomes conscious thought, but absolutely shapes our behavior. We're being guided by processes we're not aware of, making decisions for reasons we can't really articulate. If that's not a glitch in our understanding of reality, I don't know what is. Alrighty, so when routine becomes so repetitive, it starts to feel coded. So there are days when modern life feels less lived than administered. Wake up, check phone, reply to message, work, buy something, scroll, sleep, repeat. And do this often enough, and the whole thing starts to feel less like reality and more like compliance with a system that's very pleased with your consistency. And I do not mean that routine is bad. It is often what keeps life from becoming unbearable. But there is a version of routine that becomes almost too smooth, too practiced. The kind that quietly removes surprise from your days and calls that stability. When life becomes this repetitive, reality takes on a strange quality. It starts to feel programmed, scripted, like you're following code. This is what people mean when they talk about feeling like they are living in a simulation. Not that they literally think we're in the matrix, but that the texture of daily life has become so automated that it no longer feels fully real. The glitches are the moments that break the script, a moment of presence so clean that it almost startles you, a conversation that goes somewhere unexpected, something beautiful or terrible or surprising that reminds you life isn't supposed to feel this predictable. Those are the glitches, not because life is a simulation necessarily, but because anything unscripted begins to feel radical once repetition has become your dominant atmosphere. And this is a modern problem, I think. We've optimized life to the point where we've optimized out presence and genuine experience. And when you realize you're in this pattern, when you look at your day and realize it's identical to yesterday and will probably be identical to tomorrow, reality starts to feel suspect. Not because it's fake, but because you've made it so predictable that it no longer requires your full participation. And last but not least, when existence itself feels briefly unbelievable. This is the big one. The meta glitch. Everyone has moments, even if we don't talk about them much, where the simple fact of existence becomes overwhelming. You're suddenly acutely aware that you are conscious, that you are a thinking, feeling, being, moving through time, attached to people, having memories, fearing loss, wanting things. That any of this is happening at all starts to feel really, really weird and strange. And usually the moment passes quickly. You return to whatever you were doing. You answer the message, you buy the groceries, you continue performing your role in reality. But in that brief window, something opens, and what opens is not always mystical. Sometimes it is almost embarrassingly simple. The realization that existence is far stranger than the tone in which we usually discuss it. We are conscious beings on a rock floating through space, made of these same atoms as stars, experiencing subjective reality, forming societies and systems and meanings. We are all participating in something absolutely astonishing and behaving for the sake of function as if it's normal, that we can do this, that we can go about our days without being constantly overwhelmed by the sheer strangeness of being alive is maybe the most impressive feat of human consciousness. But every so often, the veil slips and you see it, the absolute improbability and strangeness of existence itself. And in that moment, you understand why some people look at all of this and say, none of this can be entirely what it seems. Oh, I totally get that. And yeah. So, what does all this mean? Are we living in a simulation? I don't know, maybe. Probably not in the literal sense, but I think what all of those moments reveal is something both simpler and more profound. Reality is thinner than we pretend. Perception is partial. Consciousness is strange. And we are far less awake than we think. We spend most of our lives in a kind of consensus trance, agreeing that things are stable and solid and straightforward because that's what allows us to function. But underneath that agreement, reality is much weirder than we usually acknowledge. Words only mean things because we agree they do. Bodies know things minds don't. Dreams can be more real than waking life. Strangers can see us more clearly than people who know us. Coincidences feel structured. Routine can make life feel programmed, and existence itself is fundamentally unbelievable. Maybe we don't live in a simulation. Maybe we are just far less awake than we think. And maybe these glitches, these moments when reality feels strange, aren't problems. Maybe they're invitations to wake up, to pay closer attention, to question, to live with more presence, because the world only feels unreal when we are not fully in it. It is not about certainty. It's about recognizing that reality is thinner than we pretend, that perception is partial, that routine can make the world feel less alive. These glitches don't give you answers. They just leave you looking at the world a little differently afterward. And honestly, that's enough. Next time you have one of these moments, when a word looks wrong or a stranger sees you too clearly or existence itself feels briefly impossible, don't dismiss it. Sit with it. Let it unsettle you. Let it remind you that reality is stranger and less solid than your daily routine would suggest. Because maybe these glitches aren't bugs. Maybe they're features, little reminders that we are participating in something much more mysterious than we usually allow ourselves to acknowledge. Right? All right. All right, guys. Thanks for exploring these reality bending moments with me today. I would love to hear about your glitches, the moments when the world felt unreal or when you question what was real or what real even means. But until next time, pay attention to the strange moments, question your routines, stay present, and remember, the world only feels fake when you are not fully in it. All right, guys, that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow. And remember, keep your energy grounded, your mind open, and your curiosity alive.